Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. This is our first podcast. We actually don't have a name for it as of yet, but this is just something that we're experimenting. My name is Kevin, and I have my brother Josh on the other end.
Hi, I'm Josh.
And this is basically a podcast talking about things that we have in common, things that we like a lot. And I think that there's no better way to start this podcast with something that was very important to our childhoods, which is Dragon Ball Z. And my brother Josh can go ahead and kick it out of why it was relevant for him.
Yeah, so Dragon Ball Z was a major staple of I think of our childhood, not just mine, but that was since I could remember. Probably some of my first memories of watching TV was Dragon Ball Z. I remember distinctly the Cell Saga was what stuck out the most, but we're going to be talking about several things, not just any particular uh, arc, but we're going to go into some details starting from the beginning.
Yeah, so well, for this one first, we're going to start with the villains that were like more important. And we're gonna rate them. We're gonna say why we think they're relevant, what we think about their design, what we think about the context that they were introduced in, and also for the story wise or the lore wise, how it was constructed and how well did it work out. But yes, as my brother said, we're going to go ahead and start first with the main thing, how it started for us. So for me, I started watching Dragon Ball in the US, and it was the English dub. So from my understanding, at that point, it was around 1996 or 7, and I believe it was the Ocean dub. I really very faintly remember it. I remember that it had a rock song, heavy, kind of like a heavy metal song. So I think that's the Ocean dub. Do you know
Yeah,
anything about that?
yeah. So the Ocean dub was a dub before obviously America took over with Funimation. The Ocean dub was the one that you hear the Rock the Dragon,
Yeah.
and they started production. Let me see. I think it was in '95.
Okay.
Let me double check that before I.
That's fine. I mean, again, this is just kind of like a normal chat. We might get some things mistaken. If you guys have any correction, just don't hesitate on sending us this information, leaving a comment. And yeah, it's a learning phase. We are super fans, but yes, definitely we don't know every single thing about it. But yes, it was around 1996 or so. It was in the Vegeta arc. So I remember I liked it a lot, but then we went to Mexico, and Mexico actually, when I went there, I'm not sure if you remember, Josh, but it started with Dragon Ball. So they were barely in Dragon Ball at that point.
Really, I thought Mexico had the dub before, was already done with all that before Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so as well because, well, seeing Mexico's one of the biggest fandoms for Dragon Ball. But yes, at least I'm not sure um, if there was showing it somewhere else, but not that I can remember. It definitely started with Dragon Ball, and at that point, it was in the, if I'm not mistaken, it was in the Red Ribbon Saga. And then from there, yeah, it went like all through Tao Pai Pai, Picaro, Picaro Daimaku, which I think in English is known as King Piccolo. And yeah, then from there it went to Dragon Ball Z, and I'll show so on and so forth. So for me, it was since it was in Spanish. I really like the Spanish dub. I don't know how much you remember about the Spanish dub, Josh, but yeah, what's your take on that?
So I mean, the Spanish I remember was in the Cell Saga. I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember it was right around the Cell games was where I started, where I have like memories of it. Um, yeah, I don't really know a whole lot about when Mexico started dubbing that Dragon Ball Z,
Hmm.
but yeah, I distinctly remember it was already in the Cell Saga, but I'm sure there were reruns by then, by the time I was watching them.
Hmm.
Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they were already almost done in the early 2000s, right?
So I want to say, well, I don't think almost done, but they were a good chunk advanced because yes, in Mexico they would repeat it a lot. But yeah, I think it was around. Well, then that's really a tough thing to remember because in Dragon Ball in Mexico, Dragon Ball was repeated and rerun so many times, up to I think 2014. It was still on a regular run. Um, Dragon Ball Kai showed up in Mexico during that time, around that time-ish, and it really didn't hit because they didn't have the original voice of they didn't have Mario Castañeda, which is the voice of Goku. They didn't have Rene Garcia, which was the voice of Vegeta, and yes, they had a few voices. I think they had the voice of Krillin.
Oh,
Uh,
weird. I thought everybody was back in the cast for.
no, no,
Oh,
and the Kai one, unfortunately, they didn't get it. And there, I think the impact of Dragon Ball Kai in the U.S. was a lot bigger in comparison
oh yeah, it was
to
way
Mexico.
way bigger.
In Mexico, everybody hated Dragon Ball Kai because the voices were not the same, how it was reduced. I mean, yes, they did remove a lot of filler, and um, it was more in comparison to the manga. But since again the voice was bad, and for the U.S. there was the big change. Because I think it was a big change. I might be mistaken, but if I remember correctly, the dub in the U.S. Does not have the original score. Is this correct?
For Kai?
No, no, no. For the
Yeah.
the previous and the normal Dragon Ball, previous to Kai.
So the original Dragon Ball Z, it was produced by the music was by Bruce Faulkner,
Oh, okay.
and now the reason why it was is switched out was because at that time, although if I'm not mistaken, Dragon Ball Z in Japan was originally meant for teenagers, and in the U.S. they were trying to make it more directed for like 7-year-olds, seven around that age group.
Actually, Dragon Ball is a shonen. So, I might be mistaken on this, but I think shonen means like young adult or something among those lines, which is generally,
Teenagers, right?
but it's actually more. It's actually I think it's like kid or something like that, but it's around like 10-year-olds. That's the point. 10 to 12 year olds or so.
So
Uh,
I guess so I guess then what I'm getting at is that the cultures were different in the sense of the U.S. was a lot more censored at that time.
mhm.
So the goal was to kind of make it more childlike, and that means make changing the music. And so at that point in time, the U.S. had decided to change the audio, so it went from in Funimation and Ocean Dub as well, but in Funimation it was by Bruce Faulkner, and it wasn't until after the whole series was over that on DVD it was the original Japanese score was re-edited in, and then it was available with the original Japanese score, but that wasn't until Dragon Ball Z was already over.
Okay. And yes, with the Dragon Ball Kai, well, they introduce what was the original score. And again, some people, and this is like a pretty big debate, it seems, or apparently from what I read online, that a lot of people are not in agreement. Like some people think, oh, the English one is definitely the better one. For me, I think it's more of a
I
where.
think this is a two-sided. I think this is a very because you grew up with the original Japanese score, and while I'm very familiar with the Japanese score, I grew up with the American, the Bruce Faulkner one. So I think that for me, for a long time, I still really like the Bruce Faulkner score.
Mhm.
I think that it added some sort of, I don't know, some sort of edge that I felt like sometimes the Japanese audio was a little flat on.
Yeah, and
But that's just my opinion.
yeah, yeah, and that's why I say that it's a very divided thing because I'm the complete opposite. I've listened to that score like a few videos here and there, and yeah, for me, it's more of a thing I think with which you grew up because for me the original
Yeah.
score is a lot better. Like it gives a lot of emphasis, especially in the legendary Super Saiyan. When he transforms into Goku transforms into Saiyan 1, which again in Mexico and obviously in Japan it's known as Super Saiyajin.
Right.
And yeah, with this one, even there's so much that we can talk about, and I think that we're going to derail it a little bit, and it's fine. But even from what I was reading, like the original, what they say, for the dialogue when Goku transforms into Super Saiyan 1, it seems that in the English dub he was like, "Oh, I am the light in the darkness," and
Oh,
I
yeah. I am speech. It was that speech was actually still in Kai was brought back, but a little bit more like professional. It was a little less childlike, but it was that
well,
speech came back.
It's not that it, and again, it's not to discredit the actual the original or the English dub, the US dub. But that's actually not what he says in the Japanese dub, and the Spanish one is a little bit more close to what it says, which is I am the Saiyan that came from Earth, and I came here to beat you, or something like that. Which again, it's not like super deep. The way that he says it, it's like much more impactful because he's super mad that spoilers, like 40 years that Krillin was killed. Um, but yeah, my point is that in the U.S. version, he was more like a superhero, and again, it's kind of we're moving past to like a different point entirely. But that I think that's why a lot of people um, in the U.S. don't like Super that much because Goku is like childish. Um, and when they're like watching the Japanese version, but that's always been Goku. It's just that in the U.S. version, they made him like say a lot more heroic things. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's fair. I think that as the series went on, though, they kind of got better at it. So near the Buu saga
mhm.
was where they really started to kind of get that childlike behavior to include that childlike behavior more.
Mhm. Yeah, so yeah, for me, I really love the Spanish dub. I I really want to watch the Dragon Ball Super movie, the Broly. That's the
Yeah,
only one I've not watched. I've watched good chunks of it. I watched like the important parts. But and I know that the Blu-ray is out, but I don't want to buy the English version. Um, and
Ooh, I
again,
don't know. I watched the Spanish dub comparison to the English, the Japanese, and I don't know. I think the English one's like I dare say it's at the same level as the Japanese one.
so wait, which one?
The English dub because I mean I'm not saying the Spanish dub wasn't good. I just think that they're past their prime in terms of voice actors.
Well, I mean, what is Mario Castañeda, Rene Garcia, also the name escapes me, the voice of Frieza. Those are like really good. Also, the voice of Broly. The voice of Broly is actually the original voice of Broly from the movie, and which is a again, I think this is the derailing show, but Broly's voice or the dubs that they did for the original Broly movie, they switched the voices of the original actors, and the only kind of cool voice was the Broly voice. Um, and I mean, they brought all of those. And yes, I do agree with you. There are some voices that are no longer they don't have the quality that they had before for voice actors in Mexico. And the
Yeah,
reason is because a lot of the times they actually had actors, they didn't have voice actors, they were actually actors. And I think how the way they would express it, they would do it like in theater, and there were also a lot of like theater actors. So I think that that's why it was so great. But yes, I do agree with you. There are some voices there that I don't like that much. But what are the main protagonists, or the main characters of that movie? The dubbing is really good. And again, I've watched those scenes. I really liked it. And again, it's not to take anything away from the English dub, and the English dubbing in general has gotten way better in comparison to the 90s. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the cool thing has been that it's the same voice actors. I mean, it's all the
yeah,
same other than Frieza and Gohan, but that's Kid Gohan. So not a lot has changed.
yeah, it's more they've gotten into their roles. They've grown as voice actors, and it's just also the writing has improved. So yeah, they're getting there. Well, except for Super, because I think that they added like a lot of things that were like that were not original or faithful to the script, and it's because like they were showing it in Adult Swim. Am I right? They're showing it
Yeah,
in Adult Swim, and that's why they were like adding a little bit more risque phrases or whatever. But I mean, I really that's the only thing that I didn't like. But the voices themselves are so much better. They've learned a lot.
yeah,
Um,
I agree. I definitely think that they learned a lot from their mistakes in the original Z. And there it was. I think that at that time, the U.S. was kind of going through a phase, basically, because all that stuff was new at that time. The Japanese anime was entirely new to the American audience, so they were trying to uh, have it received well. So like how they were trying figure out ways to have it received better than than what they thought that the audience would want. So that they were trying to basically match that, and that's really what it was. It was an experiment
do you
at that time.
Do you remember when they added a rap song to Dragon Ball GT? That was like the best thing
Yeah,
ever, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is they were trying to account. They were trying to take this new Japanese, or well, new to us, new Japanese anime, and they were trying to make it appealing to the U.S. audience.
Yes, and I agree with that. It seems that finally they're realizing that people are okay with the original content, and that's the reason that it was actually popular because if it worked in Japan, and I'm not saying that it's going to work everywhere, but if obviously if it's a major hit somewhere, and how with the original score, with the original script, there's no much reason to actually change it other than accommodate maybe some things that are not able to be translated adequately or within our culture. But overall, you already have a hit. There's no reason to change things. But I think okay, so I think we've gotten a little bit too far out from the original introduction of what Dragon Ball is and how we got familiar into it. It's just for me, bring like a very brief summary to what we're talking about. For me, Dragon Ball. I saw it in English when it was there in the U.S. I saw it in Spanish. For me, I'm a major Spanish or Latino dubbing. I really like it. I think it's the better of the dubs. Now, here for my brother Josh, it might be the other way around. He was raised more with the English version. He enjoys more the English dub. I don't know. I mean, for me, Mario Castañeda has will always be the original Goku. But yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and start with this. We're going to start about talking about all the villains in Goku. Sorry, in Dragon Ball Z. I really don't want to start with Dragon Ball because you already mentioned Dragon Ball. You didn't start with it. You're not. Maybe you're a little bit familiar now. Did you get the mangas? I know that you have the mangas of Dragon Ball Z, but you didn't get the mangas of Dragon Ball, right?
No, no. So yeah, Dragon Ball. I was never really drawn to it. I watched it. I watched several seasons of it, and I read the manga for it, bits and pieces. But it never really caught my attention. I have always been attached to Dragon Ball Z, just Dragon Ball Z.
For me,
I just never really got Dragon Ball.
For me, it was more like a journey because you grew up with Goku. So you like saw all the changes, how it went like to adventures, monster of the week type of thing, monster of the day or week of the time to actually full blown sagas.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I really like all of those. So Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if we talk about GT. I mean, there's some good things that came out of it, but a lot of bad things. Um, and yeah, Dragon Ball Super. So we're gonna start with Dragon Ball Z. We're gonna talk about the major villains. I maybe at a later point we're gonna talk about the non canon or the movie villains. But in this case, we're going to start with Raditz. Then we're going to the Nappa and Vegeta arc. Then we're going to the Frieza arc. Then we're going to the Android slash Cell. Then Majin Buu, and that would be it for the Dragon Ball Z. I'm not sure if we're going to talk of all of these. I don't know. We've already been like around. Let me check. 20 minutes talking about Dragon Ball. We haven't even started yet. So
Yeah.
that tells you how passionate we are about Dragon Ball as a whole, as a franchise. So let's go ahead and start with Raditz. So what do you have to say about Raditz? What do you
So
think of the
Raditz,
design?
so Raditz. See, it's funny you say that about the design. I never really liked Raditz's design. I think that he resembled Vegeta more. So, and that and the hair was very. I don't know. It's just. I guess it was creative if they weren't related. But he doesn't look like Goku, and he doesn't really. I don't know. He doesn't have features of Goku. I'd believe it if they said, "Oh, that's Vegeta's brother." But anyway, yeah, Raditz. I feel like they could have done more with Raditz. He was just breezed over. They could have gone more into detail like they did in that movie, where it definitely. I think Raditz could have been developed a lot more. But yeah, what's your take on Raditz?
So first, starting with the design. The design, I really didn't like it either. I mean, it's not the worst, but yes, there were definitely room for improvement there. It was obviously one of the first villains, so a lot of things changed, including it, like for example, because they were adapting from the manga to the anime, but the armor was black instead of the familiar colors that we already know. And yeah, overall the design, a very long hair. I mean, I think, I might be mistaken, but I think that's kind of why they pulled the Goku Super Saiyajin level 3. It's like reminiscent of the brother of Goku's brother Raditz. I'm not sure if you see that or if maybe
I
that's
mean,
just me.
that makes sense looking at it, looking back now. But yeah, no, at the time, it's like yeah, I didn't really see they were brothers. Like they didn't, you don't see the resemblance.
Yes, I mean there are some few key things in like the face that distinguish it from like saying oh it's maybe Vegeta's brother, but yeah the design definitely was a lot. It was very rudimentary, at least on my end.
Because if you look at the Vegeta's brother Tarble, he would pass more of Goku's brother than Raditz.
But I think that's more because after while after they refined the Saiyans or the Saiyajins, and Toriyama's style as well, a lot of things start looking a lot like each other. So like if you start looking a lot of the faces of the Saiyans, they look very similar. So I think that once he refined the style, a lot of things kind of started like even Vegeta. If you look at early Vegeta, and you look like how Vegeta looks now, like the change is huge. Like Vegeta look ugly, like super ugly when like he still like by the Frieza saga he still look a little bit ugly by then, but they were all started refining it. But like in the original arc, well we're just jumping ahead, but it's kind of like an example. It's yeah, so yeah, I guess when the with Vegeta's brother came out, that's why they look alike because it was already super refined the style. But yeah, Reddit's style I really didn't like it. So let's go ahead and go to the context. So the context, I think it was very important because it introduced kind of like, wait, there's something a bigger threat outside. So someone else is coming, and you're like, oh, okay, so It is maybe the character itself wasn't that interesting, but it was a huge step, and I think that Raditz did give the context of what was to come. So context-wise, I think that even though the character design was not very interesting, what it implied, it was pretty big for Dragon Ball, and it was how it actually made it start and it made it work. It was a even though right now maybe I don't enjoy the character a whole lot, but when it came out, I was like, wait, oh, they're coming from another planet and they can maybe destroy humanity, and I think that part is very easy to lose, but it's I think it makes the character at during the time that it was released very interesting.
Well, I think that you're right about Raditz being like the stepping stone to the next big villain, but I think that, like I said, I think it could have been expanded upon more. It could have drawn a little bit more interest in the Saiyans because if you, I think like the they didn't really discuss the Saiyan background too much. I think that that's when they could have really, since they were introducing the Saiyans, like the story of the Saiyans in that specific timeline. I think Raditz could have really expanded upon that, and then when Vegeta arrived, things would have made a lot more sense than they did when he got there, because all you really knew was that yeah, they're all Saiyans from this one planet, but the only thing Raditz taught you was that oh yeah that they're just from another planet and then he's his brother and that's it and then Vegeta's coming. That's what I got from it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I mean, and looking at hindsight, yes, Toriyama should have worked more on that. But at the same time, I mean, Toriyama was kind of new for that style. I mean, he did do the whole Dragon Ball, but Dragon Ball, as you mentioned, you didn't like it because it was like super different compared to Dragon Ball Z. The
The
only
reason why, really quick, I know that we're on a different topic, but the reason why I didn't like Dragon Ball is because I felt it was very stale. Like the things just felt repetitive. Goku was going to this place, and then everybody's like trying to shoot at him, and like then he kills him, and then that's it. Like the villains don't really change too much.
Well, actually, and I'm sorry to disagree or contradict you, but it does change a whole lot because how it starts. So there's basically two things that change a lot. And again, we're going a little bit out, but I mean it's fine. That's how it works sometimes. But Goku started as an adventure type of anime. So they would go to place to place. They would find a new monster. They would kill or destroy the monster, and they would go to the next thing. But then, when Goku, and that was to the like the maybe the third, 3/4 part of the story. Then Goku grows up, and then when Goku grows up, it turns a little bit more like Dragon Ball Z-ish. So during the Piccolo or the Piccolo, during that part when he's grown up, the Piccolo, well, actually it was called Piccolo Junior, and during that phase, it was a lot more like Dragon Ball Z, and I think that's when kind of like Akira Toriyama was started to learn that type of style. Because yes, that was a lot more like Dragon Ball Z in comparison to the early Dragon Ball, in which again they would look for the Dragon Balls, they would go ahead and do for a wish. The first times they did like dumb wishes, and they would have to wait like a year so they can go ahead and look for it again, and everybody would go through the Dragon Balls. So actually, at that point, it was the title makes made like a lot more sense because it was always about the Dragon Ball. They always
Yeah.
wanted to capture the Dragon Balls. They were after it. They were seeking for it. Adventure. Bad guys would go after it, and it would be a monster of the week. Somebody different trying to go for the Dragon Ball. There were different teams looking for different evil people looking for a Dragon Ball. There was even like a crazy bunny um, that would turn people into bunnies. So yeah, it was definitely the subtext, and the actual theme was for a lot younger people. So then when it went to Dragon Ball Z, yes, it went more for teens. Um, so yeah, I mean, going back to to Raditz, yes, you're right with Raditz. Again, they should have added more. Two Raditz, they should have introduced more from the Saiyajins and why they are like they are. But yeah, overall, context-wise, I think it was very important. Now moving to story or lore-wise, yes, lore-wise was very very lacking. I didn't like that they didn't introduce too much about it. And again, context-wise, it was important, and he was like, oh, he was kind of like the messenger type of thing. So that's kind of like the reason why I give it a pass because yes, it was he was the messenger. It was he was not made to be to made like the most interesting character. He was more this, as you said, the stepping stone. And sometimes it is story wise, it is important that you start somewhere, and you it can't always be 100%. It has to go from like 50 to 100, then go back to 50, then go back to 100. Because if you keep it always at 100, what's gonna happen is that people are gonna lose interest. And they're like, well, it's always fighting. It's always people that are like super bad, and they always are the same level of threat. So then you don't feel the tension because it's like, oh, this person is more powerful, or this person, okay, so he's powerful, but it turns out that he's actually just a minion of someone else's plans or whatever. So overall, I mean, yes, I do agree partially with you that yes, they should have at least added more context or more story to Goku's narrative, maybe more explanation on again because Goku was evil when he arrived to planet Earth, and then his grandpa or Son Gohan dropped him in the head, and he fell and he hit his head, and then he became evil. And I know, again, I haven't watched the full Dragon Ball Super movie, but I'm pretty sure they kind of retcon some of those things because
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, no, the like
And
you're saying they kind of
and
changed
sorry,
things a bit?
yeah, and sorry, it's just sorry to interrupt you, but just not going into too much spoilers, I guess, because I mean, I guess it's Dragon Ball Super Broly is fairly new still. So yeah, just not going into too much spoilers, but I think they do retcon the kind of the origin story, right?
Yeah, they do kind of switch a couple things. I'm not going to go into detail, but they
Okay.
do. In the beginning, you kind of go, that's not how it went. That
Hmm.
there was a couple of scenes where I did say that, but yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail.
Hmm. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I agree. So it was if you were to rate Raditz on a scale from 1 to 10, what would you give Raditz?
In terms of what,
Overall, like as a character, story, context, your final rating, like in Dragon Ball Z.
he's a forgettable character. I give him like a three. He's a forgettable character.
Okay,
Honestly, you,
that's
you
kind
just
of
know, you just know he was there. That's it.
for me. I would give him a 5 or a 6 because the story itself. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, the fights were interesting. The character, yes, was lacking some things, but again, it was a pretty good stepping stone. And yeah, for me, it was a 5 or a 6 maximum. So I will go with a 5.
Yeah. Okay. So next is we're gonna go into Vegeta because Vegeta and Nappa because that's when they were introduced was at the moment that Raditz was killed by Piccolo
Hmm.
when he did the Makon Kosapo, or as the American audience knows it, the special beam cannon.
The special beam cannon.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. So at that it was at that point that it was introduced that Nappa and Vegeta were already on their way to Earth, and where that was introduced at when they both Goku and Raditz died.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go ahead and again the same structure. What about the design?
The design of both are we talking about individually like Piccolo or I mean individually Vegeta and Nappa?
Yeah, I mean, you can start first with Nappa, and then you can go with Vegeta.
So Nappa was a little bit better than Raditz. I think he had like he was definitely a more powerful and more ruthless character. I think he had some cool moments too, where he's like about to kill Gohan, right as Goku arrived, and yeah, I liked him a little more. I think that he was a little different too, because they made him bald versus the rest of the Saiyans who all had hair. And yeah, I mean, I think he was like maybe like a good five
You,
as
you
a.
you kind of stole like my joke. I was going to say basically that Nappa was the opposite of Raditz, in which he
Yeah,
had no hair.
yeah, pretty much.
So design wise for me, um, Nappa looks interesting, and again, it's because it's the
Gotta be the
complete
mustache.
opposite of Raditz. He is like a pretty huge. The suit is also again kind of like the Raditz one, so it looks okay. But yeah, I think he had like his weird mustache, which is, I mean, it made him an interesting character design was. So I like the design. Now, moving to the context, I mean, he came together with Vegeta, so it's a little bit difficult to talk about the context without Vegeta. So I'll talk about the design for Vegeta first. So we'll just go ahead and go Vegeta, Nappa, and one thing, then go ahead and with the next thing, so on and so forth. So Vegeta, the design was very interesting. I like the shape of like Vegeta's head, very pointy, and with his Scouter. Also, it was a little bit different. The color was different, so yeah, it was like pinkish, right?
Yeah, no, but didn't at one point it changed to brown too?
About what the Scouter?
No, no, no. Oh no, I'm talking about like the hair, the
Oh,
original
oh no,
Vegeta design.
yeah. The hair was actually red first.
Right.
It was kind of like brownish reddish.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's again because they were trying to adapt the manga. They didn't have really much to go from, and that's a lot of the problem with from manga to anime. And again, I'm going to go a little bit off the track, but for example, for Yu-Gi-Oh, um, they Seto Kaiba, and they started a series called Yu-Gi-Oh, known as Yu-Gi-Oh! Zero or something like that, which was like the very original one. And for that one, his hair was turquoise, or well, actually no, it was green. And they even do a nod of that in the then after that in Yu-Gi-Oh, with his brother Noah Kaiba, which he has
Yeah.
the same color of hair. So it's because a lot of the times they don't have an idea, and a lot of the times there's not a cover art for them yet. So at that they until they finally release a cover art for the actual cover of the manga, and they release it in full color is when they realize, oh, so
Hello.
it's supposed to be this color instead of this one. So yeah,
Mhm.
they started with red. Yes, they went ahead and changed to black once they, I think, I suppose they saw like the cover of one of those and they were like, oh, it's supposed to be black, and they switched the color. So yeah, that definitely happened. That was when they were in the planet of the giant like grasshopper things, which I forget their names, but yes, I definitely remember those things, and that's when they destroyed the planet, they ate the people there, and yeah,
Yeah.
that was cool. So and that was a cool introduction to the Saiyans as well.
Yeah. Vegeta, I think that he definitely had like a. I've always liked the development of Vegeta. I think we could spend an entire podcast on just that, on just talking about the development of Vegeta, because he was easily the most developed character in the whole series. Um, so I think
And
that.
and sorry to interrupt you real quick because I forgot to make this this kind of emphasis on this. So we're talking about the character within the story arc. So I know that you weren't going to touch that too much, but this is just Vegeta as a character within the arc.
Okay.
Okay, so go
Yep.
ahead.
So at that point, when Vegeta is introduced, I think that he was a uh, he sparked really that at that point that interest in the Saiyans, because it's like, wow, like you got all these different personalities. You got like, and then they realized that that kind of like the Saiyans were a lot stronger than any other foe that they had faced at that time. So I think I don't know. I think that Vegeta really at that point created like a spark of interest in that villain. Like he was easily at that point the most interesting villain.
Yes, the only thing that I at that point I really didn't like that much, and this is kind of in designish, but it's more of on his attack. So his key move during this arc is the Gallic Gun.
Yep.
I really didn't like the Gallic Gun. There is a move, and again in this one I really don't remember that well, but the move where he raises his hands and then just like screams and like there's like a huge power, and I think it was purple, so it might have been like a huge Gallic gun. That was the only like it was really cool move in regards to that. But the Gallic gun itself, I didn't like that move. And again, this is just about the arc, so then we can at a later point they definitely changed that. But yeah, overall, context-wise, I think that both characters were like really, really important because yes, there's already like a okay, so something big is ahead, but still to the point that they themselves were an like a super big threat, and it was like what caught you more interest. While Raditz was like okay, so he was they kind of like made Piccolo kill for, Goku, while Goku was grabbing his brother. At the actual scene was not like too big, but if you put it in comparison with the Vegeta one like is so much bigger. Like they reintroduced the Ozaru form.
Yep.
Um,
Or the great ape, as most know it.
yeah, the Great Ape. So they reintroduced that, and because a lot of people like didn't even know what that was. That's a direct Dragon Ball thing.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, I really liked how they did it. Like they really executed super well. They made him look really, really threatening. And yeah, I mean, I think the Vegeta saga was or arc, sorry, was really important to Dragon Ball. While the Raditz was a stepping stone. Yes, Vegeta was definitely the thing that kept people watching Dragon Ball Z.
Yep. I think that's fair. Now, and if when we're talking about what you give the character, yeah, he's at that point in time. If we're talking about design, at that time, interest and all that, probably like a good seven.
So for Vegeta, the arc, I would give it. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I would give it like a 7.5 for me.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. We're pretty um into it. It seems as we're around the 45-minute arc, 45-minute time. So let's go ahead and go with Frieza. I think Frieza is going to be a good closure for this
Yeah.
first part. So Frieza, they introduce. Now they have to go to another planet. Uh, well, Piccolo is dead, so they need the Dragon Balls are gone. They need some way to revive them, so they have to go to this planet Namek, and they get need to get the Super Dragon Balls. So let's go with Frieza, the design itself. So there are multiple designs for Frieza. So the original one is well Frieza within his pod. So what
Well, before I guess before we get into that,
okay.
I want to get a little bit of an introduction of how Frieza is brought into the story and what he really what the significance is.
Okay.
So, um, so basically, Vegeta and Nappa and Raditz were all working for for basically for the Frieza Force. They basically were his henchmen, and they at that point in time when when they fought Vegeta, uh, that's really when they brought up the whole thing. Like no one at the time really knew about Frieza. They just knew that they were going to go to Planet Namek, as you just mentioned, because the Dragon Balls were no longer worked on Earth. So when they went there, that's really when uh, I think was it that Frieza was listening on the Scouters? Is that what it was? That's how he knew to go to
Yes.
Nap, right? Because he
Hmm.
was listening to Scouters. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and then that's how Frieza then shows up as well over there, and Frieza being like the main boss, the boss of Vegeta and Nappa and Raditz. That's why he was there, and that's how we get to to being on Namek.
And by the way, Frieza in Spanish is known as Freezer, which that's the actual joke, because like his brother's name Cooler, and then the father's name King Cold. So that was the theme. As for the Saiyans, the theme was vegetables. Kakarot being carrot, Vegeta being vegetable, Raditz being or radish. Um, yeah, so that the joke with them was that it was cold related things.
Do you know that in Japanese it is Frieza?
Oh no, yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying, but that's supposed to be the joke, and also it's because of how they pronounce things. That I think that it has to be with that as well. It's like, for example, it's Picaro, but they actually it's Piccolo in English, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like in Spanish, he's known as Picaro.
Yeah.
So I think again, it's just maybe a matter of interpretation of what they're saying, and maybe again, maybe in this case, it was a messed up of a misinterpretation of what they were saying in Japanese, and that's how they translated it. But yeah, I think that's supposed to be the joke regardless. That it's Freezer, um, again King Cold and Cooler.
So
So
basically, the refrigerators versus the food.
yeah, basically. So, Akira was super original with his naming.
Yep. So yeah. So then, okay. So now we get into with Frieza. So he has obviously the different forms. His base form when he's, or I mean, basically when he's in his pod. Um, it's that really short, pinkish looking, um, horned kind of like. I don't even know what to describe what he looks like really because he has a very unique design. Um, he kind of looks like I don't know. I don't know what I would compare to what he would. He doesn't really look like anything that I've seen that I can compare to.
During his pod form, he really
Yeah.
doesn't look that menacing. So I think that's a very important with the forms things, that if you have to have that in mind, that if you're gonna have something with a form, he can't start looking super menacing, because I mean then where do you go from there, right?
Yeah, because it has to spark interest as a villain. And he's like, oh well, that guy's like the boss. Like, well, he doesn't look like anything. So then it draws people to pay attention to the character because it's like, um, if he's the boss, then there's probably more that he has to offer. So that's why I think that was an interesting first design for the first one.
Yeah. And by the way, so for the Frieza thing, um Frieza in the English like dub, it's Frieza with IE, right?
Yeah, it's Frieza,
Yeah, and
Frieza.
and I'm pretty sure in the Japanese one it's Freeza.
Yeah,
So I
it's
mhm.
correct.
Yeah, for the second form, well, actually gets out of his pod, so technically that's not a second form.
I
Uh
mean, it could constitute because if there was like this short period where he kind of breaks off the armor
yeah.
and he's and it looks just a little bit different
Hmm.
and but it's not a second form, it's just him kind of breaking out of his armor.
Yeah. And then from there, here's where I might be misremembering something since it's been a while. So I think then from there he transforms into the big Frieza, right?
Yep, the tall one with like the
The
horn.
King Coldish type of.
Yep.
Okay.
Both, yep.
Then from there he grows like a big head,
From
and mhm,
it's like the elongated head, which is
yeah,
the yep, and then like the shoulders kind of pop out.
yes, and then from there he transforms into, well, the Frieza that we know now. and then from there he transforms into, I think it's called like this Super Frieza or perfect form. So it's basically when he gets buff.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's 100%. There we go,
100%.
100%. Yeah.
So 100%. So yeah, I mean for the forms, for me, after the third one, when he gets like his like big head, his elongated head, I was like thinking, well, he's just getting like more monstrous and monstrous. So it's like where he's gonna go from there? Like he has to transform like a huge monster or something, and
Yeah,
then
and then when he, in fact, when he mentions that there was still one more transformation, I think there's a scene where Krillin tries to envision like what it's even like weirder, and so it just kind of it's sort of like ironic, kind of funny how it
well,
how
it subverts your expectations.
yeah.
You're like, okay, so something super big is gonna come out, and he is gonna be a monster. It's gonna be super difficult to get him, and then he transformed to that version, the version that we know right now. Which again, you kind of are. I don't want to say disappointed, but you're like, oh, so now he just reverted into kind of his original form, but less, because now he
Yeah.
doesn't have his horns. He doesn't have like the armor parts.
And then
Well, just in his head.
even his skin, he doesn't have like the pinkish skin and purple and all that anymore, other than like the little uh, things on his shoulders and head and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then you see what he does, and they're like, oh, okay, so he is still very menacing. And I think the form, the design wise, although I was expecting something else, the power, the story, the character itself is made so imposing that yes, it definitely gains your respect. And that's what I like about it because the design itself, it's like very, I want to say minimalistic because they take a lot of the elements that the other Frieza forms had. So again, they remove the horns, they remove the pinkish skin, they remove the texture of the pinkish skin. He looks much smoother, sleeker. So yes, he definitely looks like a faster form. So I'll give them that. But the power wise, he doesn't look that powerful. But he earns the viewer's respect of what he does and how intimidating he is when he does it. So,
That's what made him a really good villain was just how eerily calm he was,
mhm,
especially at those times like when he kind of beats the life out of Vegeta.
yeah,
I think that's really brought on like the fear, that fear of that character, of that villain. Like, wow, like this guy is ruthless because he he's just super calm while he's just beating the life out of Vegeta. I think that that's a pretty
and
up to that point, until that point, there hadn't been a villain like that.
and I think before we get like super into Frieza, do you even want to mention the Ginyu Force? I mean, does is there anything like relevant that you want to mention from that? I personally I like the Ginyu Force. Um, for me, like Rikum was the funniest thing. Like the thing, like the way he loses his teeth, were funny.
Yeah, I feel like the Guinea Force was more of a filler, because they didn't really play that much of a significant role. It was just characters they were just
I mean,
obstacles in the story.
maybe the characters themselves were not that important, but what actually happened within that of brief part of the arc, I think it did establish some good things. Maybe not the Ginyu Force itself was like super great. Again, although I really loved Raccoon when when I was a kid because like it was like super funny his moves that he would do and and like all the things he would do are, like super funny to me. But
So
but sorry,
I do think that what it did was it kind of it showed Vegeta had a different side. I think that's
there we
really
go. That's where I was going. So yes, so that's kind of where when Vegeta turns starts turning into an anti-hero. So he is no longer the villain. he starts to do, even though he begrudgingly does it, and he is not like friends or anything with them. He becomes allies with Gohan and Krillin because he has to. He has no other option.
Because
And
at that point in time, they're kind of fighting the greater evil.
yes, and I mean, at this point, I also we are also kind of skipping Dodoria and Zaban. Um, but I think that the Ginyu Force was kind of like the key thing, where it makes it like more relevant that you notice that term because uh, I mean, yes, when like he previous to that, Vegeta helps Goku
Hmm.
to heal. So I guess that's there. That's like kind of like where he actually starts to turn. But when he actually like joins forces with Krillin and Gohan to fight them while Goku recovers to fight the Ginyu Force um and well basically the remainder of the Ginyu Force because what's his name Guido or right
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the green dude.
yeah.
Um, yes, and then yeah, I think that 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 at that point the Ginyu Force at least deserves a mention because yes, it was kind of important in that sense that it kind of more solidified that Vegeta was on the way of kind of showing some redeeming light for the character, and maybe that he wouldn't be the super evil character that we knew or a main villain.
Hmm.
And again, I also kind of want to mention a little bit, like ever so slightly, Dodoria and Saban, because I mean, Dodoria is not really that memorable to be honest. So he's just like a minion, and then to show that Vegeta is more powerful, I think for me maybe Saban was the more interesting character because well, Saban is like he's like a kind of he looks like super like a whatever character. Like he's supposed to be like attractive or something like that,
Hmm.
and then he transforms like to this huge monster, well, like big monster, and that kind of gets you off guard because he doesn't look powerful, and then he turns into this form, and all of a sudden now he's a menace. So I did want to point that out because I Saban as a character, it was pretty interesting. He was like his voice was kind of weird, you know, like the type of characters that you don't get when you're a kid. It's like oh
Yeah,
he's like kind of quirky type of character,
yeah,
but he was definitely an interesting character.
yeah. Zarbon wasn't. I don't know. He was okay. I thought he was all right. Like he's kind of a he's the more interesting of the two
Yes,
between.
definitely
He's the
yes.
more interesting of the two. Uh,
Dodoria was more like kill bait type of thing.
yeah, yeah. Dora was just another obstacle that they just got rid of. But Zarbon did have a little bit present more of a interest factor. Like he had another form, so yeah, he was a little more interesting.
Yeah, so then from there, okay, now that we mentioned the Ginyu Force, and again we mentioned Dodoria and Sabon. I call him Sabon because in Spanish he's called Sabon.
Yeah, and
Um,
in English it's Zarbon.
mhm. So yeah, then going back to Frieza, um, again getting to the final form to 100%. Design wise, I definitely the only one that kind of pushes you now that you see the full forms. What I was saying initially, well, when he got his big head, and then you're like, oh, he's gonna transform into a monster. But now that you see it like all of its forms, it makes sense. So the one that sticks out now is the one with the elongated head with the big head, because it's like, well, they obviously it was a misdirect. That was the clear intention because when you're looking at transformations, that stage doesn't make much sense into with the final form that you see.
Right.
But I guess that again that was on purpose because they were doing a misdirect on purpose, which
Yeah.
it definitely worked.
Yeah. I don't. I guess I don't really know. I didn't really get that much into the characters. I think they were another stepping stone too. Um, but I think like with the Guinea Force, they were really the ones that played that one. If we're going to talk about the what roles they played, yeah, the Guinea Force definitely showed a side of Vegeta that hadn't been seen before.
I think we're kind of a little bit of a, I think talking a little bit different things. So we're talking about Frieza now, right?
Yep.
Okay, okay. So yes, so Frieza again, Frieza wise, the designs again, I like the designs. Story wise now, sorry, context wise, I think this kind of was, if Vegeta was the thing that kept you watching Dragon Ball, I think Frieza was what solidified Dragon Ball like in relevance and kind of. I don't want to be like, oh, in the entire history of the world, but at least in the recent memory for entertainment, or for kids entertainment, or for cartoon or animated entertainment. Yes, Frieza was definitely something that was super. It inspired a lot of people in the future. Well, the future for from the '80s. So that's the past for us.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, definitely for me, he was a really important character. He also, context-wise, brought the Super Saiyan, which was really cool and a little bit of like a tidbit. The reason that Akira Toriyama brought that form is because he and whoever assisted him would save an inking. So
Oh,
so they wouldn't have to ink his hair. So it
right.
was less work for them. And I mean, don't they did it for purposes to push out their mangas in time because they were like super pressured. And well, all mangakas are super pressured to finish their work on time. They have like a lot of work, and I think it was only Akira Toriyama and the actual coloring slash inker, who was like, um, that was their team.
Right.
So yeah, being like two people and saving and inking, yeah, I mean that's, it was a really good choice. I mean they did the correct thing, and it looks super. The Saiyan, we're going a little bit with Goku now, but yeah, that was definitely a good choice on that end. But yeah, Frieza overall, context-wise, very relevant. I think it was, for a lot of people, the highest point in whole Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, I think, and it's a good argument to say if he was like a best villain in the whole in the whole series. That's a very good argument. Is Frieza?
Yeah, so now going into the scoring. Uh, I'll let you go first.
For the English Japanese scores.
No. Well, I mean, if that's kind of not specifically to Frieza, but I was referring to the scoring in the actual overall of
Oh,
Frieza, the character.
Frieza. Yeah, the design was brilliant. I think he's super creative. I think that's one of the most creative designs
Mhm.
with Frieza because they had so many forms and they all did kind of look unique. So yeah, I give that a 8.5, 8.5, 9.
Yeah, so I will go with a 9, almost a 9.5. And actually, let me think of it context-wise. Actually, of all of the Dragon Ball Z villains, well, Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball. Okay, so should we talk about Dragon Ball GT or not?
No, not just yet. That's a completely different.
Oh no, yeah, I don't mean now, but like overall, just so I'm thinking about all the villains, and so when I'm scoring them, I'm not just like scoring them because it's like a, oh, I think it was good, 7.5 out of 10, but
To be
rather,
to be fair though, Dragon Ball GT was only partially. Some characters were designed by Akira Toriyama.
oh,
I think
oh no,
because
yeah, and sorry, and I completely understand that, but what I'm saying more is that should we take Dragon Ball GT into consideration for our villains in the future? And the reason that I'm asking this again is because I want to take that into my scoring to see if I should be scoring them lower and higher in comparison to all the characters. Because, like for example, there's going to be some that are like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I don't want it to be like, oh, so in Dragon Ball Z, this isn't context-wise. I would maybe give it like 10, 10. But if it's Dragon Ball GT and Super, then it's like, okay, maybe it's a little bit higher because if that's the all the villains that we're taking into consideration, there might be better villains, there might be worse villains.
Yeah, then I guess well, since we're considering Super, we might as well consider
G2?
GT. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just look quickly into my brain and just think about the GT villains.
Uh,
So I'll go with a 9. I'll go with a 9. Overall, Frieza 9. Uh, it, and to be honest, it's for a lot of people, I think this would be the 10, and I really want to give it a 9.5, but just because I'm trying to get a recollection of all the villains within the catalog of Dragon Ball, the franchise, and I think there are a few, maybe just like one or two that I would say that they're a little bit better um, than Frieza in design or how much I like them as a whole.
hmm
So I'll give Frieza a 9.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So there we go. I think we have exceeded the hour mark. I think this is a good time to stop. If you're liking the podcast, go ahead and please leave it a thumbs up, a like, share it, and we'll try to continue these. And the purpose of these is more for us to kind of talk, interact a little. We really don't have that much time to interact with each other, and this is overall a good time. Just we're having fun. If you guys are having fun with us, again, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to provide any correction, if you want to go ahead and maybe say something that we could improve, definitely leave a like, leave a comment, and yes, that would be it.
Yeah.
This would be Kevin. Go ahead.
Also, future ideas for the podcast are also welcome.
Yes, future ideas as well. And again, this is not going to be a Dragon Ball centered podcast overall, but definitely it is going to have an important part of our podcast since there's so much that we have to talk about Dragon Ball and that we like it so much that yes, it's going to be a good part of podcast about Dragon Ball, but it's not going to be exclusively of Dragon Ball. Maybe just a few next podcasts because I mean we have to finish the villains first.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot
And
of
there are a lot of villains, so maybe you're gonna see the maybe first 4 or 5 podcasts regarding this as we kind of scratch the surface there. And maybe next time I might have to watch a few episodes to remind a few things. I've watched the series so many times. I want to say at least five times, like as a whole, like the whole from Raditz to Majin Buu.
yeah,
Because again, in Mexico they would show it every single time. People would never get bored of it. So for like I want to say 14 like 14 years straight, that's the only thing that they would show on the prime time for a cartoon.
yeah.
So, yeah, but there's definitely some things that I might be misremembering, a few things that already kind of like escaped my memory, and I tried to go back on and see like, oh, I forgot this, I forgot that. But yeah, just again, leave your comments, subscribe, any ideas, and we'll go ahead and work on it. And so this is it on my end. I'm Kevin, and
I'm Josh.
thank you for watching.